Stay back there in the background. And for the love of God, do not embarrass our daughter." My wife Julia hissed those words into my ear, with her fingernails digging into my bicep through the thin fabric of my suit jacket. She pushed me toward the swinging door of the catering pantry, making sure I remained completely hidden from the sight of the wealthy guests filling that luxurious rented penthouse in the city. I stumbled slightly, regaining my balance against a stainless steel counter where a waiter was organizing trays of smoked salmon. He looked at me with pity, but I simply straightened my tie. It was a clip-on tie, because my hands shake a little these days. Not from age, but from 40 years of vibrating machinery working as a master machinist in the industrial zone. Julia glared at me one last time, scanning my outfit with pure disgust. "That suit is from 1990, Michael. It smells like mothballs and failure. If anyone asks, you are Tommy's distant uncle visiting from out of town. Do not tell them you are Rachel's father. Tommy's trying to close a $5 million deal with venture capitalists tonight. If they see you, if they see your calloused hands and that grease stain you can never manage to wash out of your cuticles, they will think less of him." She paused and her voice grew colder. "They will think less of us. Stay right here. Don't come out until the speeches are over." She spun on her heels, smoothing out her silk dress and plastered a fake smile on her face before disappearing back into the party. I was left alone, surrounded by the smell of warm hors d'oeuvres and cleaning fluid. "My name is Michael Bennett, and I am 72 years old. I built the house where my wife sleeps with my bare hands. I paid for the college degree that my daughter Rachel hangs on her office wall. And tonight, at my daughter's promotion party, I was being hidden away like a dirty secret just because I didn't fit the aesthetic of her new life. Through the crack in the swinging door, I could see them. My daughter Rachel holding a glass of champagne, laughing at something said by a man in a $3,000 suit. She looked beautiful, but hard. Her eyes were constantly scanning the room, calculating, evaluating. Beside her was my son-in-law, Tommy. He was loud, taking up way too much space, his laugh echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I listened as he patted the shoulder of a potential investor. "Ah, the in-laws," Tommy said, his voice cutting through the low hum of the jazz music. "My mother-in-law is a saint, truly a woman of culture. But the father?" He lowered his voice, but not enough. I leaned closer to the gap in the door. "The old man is a lost cause." Tommy continued swirling his whiskey. "He is completely senile. He doesn't even know what day it is anymore, honestly. He's just a financial burden at this point. We're thinking about putting him in Silver Lake Assisted Living next month. It is a budget facility, but hey, he won't know the difference, right?" My heart hammered against my ribs. Silver Lake. I knew that place. It was a warehouse for the dying, a place that smelled like urine and bleach, where they sedated the residents just to keep them quiet. I wasn't senile. I read engineering journals every single morning. I could still tell you the tensile strength of titanium alloy down to the third decimal. But to them, I was just a line item in their budget that needed to be erased. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. They were planning to get rid of me. Suddenly, the room went dead silent. The jazz band stopped playing mid-note. The chatter died instantly, replaced by a collective gasp. I looked through the gap in the door and saw why. The private elevator doors had opened, and a phalanx of security guards stepped out, clearing a path. Behind them walked a man who radiated power the way a blast furnace radiates heat. He was old, maybe a few years older than me, but he moved with the predatory grace of a man who owned the building, the block, and probably the entire city. It was August Turner. Gus Turner, the CEO of Turner Engines, a billionaire whose thrusters powered half the commercial flights in the world and almost every rocket the space agency sent into orbit. He was the guest of honor, the man Tommy had been bragging about knowing for weeks, though I suspected they had never actually met. Tommy and Rachel practically sprinted across the room. I watched my son-in-law adjust his cufflinks, a layer of sweat breaking out on his forehead. This was his moment. This was the handshake that would save him from the mountain of gambling debt I knew he was hiding. Tommy extended his hand, his smile stretching so wide it looked painful. "Mr. Turner, Tommy's voice boomed. What an honor. I am Tommy. We spoke on the phone with your assistant. Welcome to my humble celebration. Gus stopped. He looked at Tommy's extended hand and then brought his gaze up to Tommy's face. He didn't shake it. He didn't even blink. He just looked right through him as if Tommy were made of glass. Where easy? Gus asked. His voice was gravel and steel, quiet but dominant enough to be heard at the very back of the room. Tommy blinked in confusion. I'm sorry, sir. Where is who? Gus ignored him. He started walking. He moved through the crowd and people parted like the waters of the Red Sea. He wasn't looking at the investors. He wasn't looking at Rachel. He was scanning the perimeter of the room, his sharp eyes hunting for something. I shrank back into the shadows of the pantry, the breath caught in my throat. I knew those eyes. I hadn't seen them in 40 years, not since a freezing winter night in a bankrupt machine shop down in the industrial zone. But I knew them. Gus stopped in the middle of the room and turned slowly, and then his gaze locked dead onto the pantry door. He saw the sliver of my face through the crack. For a second time, stood still. He started walking straight toward me. Julia realized what was happening. She lunged forward, her face pale. Mr. Turner, please. The kitchen is for staff only. There is nothing back there but the help. Let me get you a drink. Gus brushed right past her without breaking his stride. He pushed the swinging door open with a force that made the hinges rattle. The light from the party flooded the dark pantry, blinding me for a moment. I stood there trapped between a rack of drying plates and a commercial refrigerator, wearing my 30-year-old suit. Gus Turner stood 3 feet away from me. He looked older, his hair completely white with deep lines carved around his mouth, but the intensity was exactly the same. He stared at me, his eyes searching my face for the young man I used to be. Then his gaze drifted to my ear. I have a habit, a tic really, of keeping a yellow carpenter's pencil tucked behind my right ear. I've done it since I was 20. Even at a party I felt naked without it, so I had a small pencil tucked back there now. Gus let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for decades. Michael, he whispered. His voice cracked, losing all that CEO authority, sounding exactly like the desperate young engineer I once knew. Is it you? I opened my mouth to speak, to say yes, to ask him how he found me, but my throat was as dry as dust. Gus took a shaky step forward. I have been looking for you, he said, his voice trembling. I have detectives on payroll who have done nothing but search for the man with a carpenter's pencil for 40 years. They all told me you were dead. The room behind him was in absolute silence. Hundreds of people were straining to hear why the billionaire was talking to the old man in the pantry. Tommy appeared in the doorway, his face twisted into a mask of confusion and panic. Mr. Turner, he stammered. Do you know my father-in-law? Gus didn't look at him. He kept his eyes locked on me. Know him? Gus said, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. This man is the only reason any of you know my name. This man saved my life. He saved my company. I owe him a debt that can never be fully repaid. I finally found my voice. It came out raspy and weak. Gus, I said you didn't owe me anything. It was just a valve. I just fixed the valve. It wasn't just a valve, Michael, Gus said with sudden ferocity. It was the future. Before I could say another word, Julia shoved her way between us. She physically positioned herself in front of me, blocking Gus's view. Her face was twisted into a terrifying smile. Her eyes looked manic. Oh, Mr. Turner, you must be confused. She laughed a sharp, hysterical sound. My husband is very confused. He has early onset senile dementia. He hallucinates. He thinks he knows famous people all the time. Last week, he thought the mailman was the president. I took a step forward. Julia stopped. I said. She whipped around and dug her fingers into my chest, shoving me back against the counter. Shut up, Michael. She hissed low enough so only I could hear, but with enough venom to kill. Don't ruin this for us. Then she turned back to Gus, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I am so sorry you had to see this. He wanders off. He gets confused. He doesn't know who you are. He barely even knows who we are half the time. Tommy caught on instantly. He grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. Right, exactly. Dad is having one of his episodes. We need to get him home immediately. He needs his medication. Security! Can we get some help over here? No, I shouted. I'm not confused. Gus, it's me. But the narrative had already been set. Two massive security guards obeying the host of the party stepped forward. They grabbed me by the arms. Gus tried to step around Julia, but she was like a brick wall, chattering rapidly, apologizing, creating pure chaos to drown out my voice. Mr. Turner, please. It distresses him when people stare. We are handling it. Gus looked at me, confusion clouding his face. Julia's lie was plausible. I was old, poorly dressed, looking visibly shaken, and she was my wife. Why would a wife lie about her husband's mental state in front of a billionaire? It didn't make sense to him. And in that moment of hesitation, Tommy dragged me toward the service elevator. Get him out of here. Tommy growled at the guards as they shoved me inside the metal box. Throw him in an Uber. Send him to the house and make sure he stays there. The last thing I saw before the elevator door slid shut was Gus standing in the pantry holding a half-empty glass of whiskey, staring at the empty space where I had just been standing with an expression of profound anguish. It looked like he had finally found a ghost, only for it to vanish all over again. As the elevator descended, the silence was suffocating. The guards wouldn't look at me. I leaned my head against the cold metal wall and closed my eyes. I wasn't senile. I wasn't confused, but as the humiliation washed over me, I realized something truly terrifying. My family didn't just want me hidden. They were actively rewriting my reality. They were erasing me. And if they could lie to a billionaire about my sanity in a room packed with witnesses, what were they planning to do to me when we were alone behind closed doors? The Uber driver they called was confused when the security guards practically threw me into his back seat. Just drive one of them, said, tossing a crumpled $20 bill through the window. Take him to the address on the app. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the bright lights of the hotel behind. I sat in the darkness watching the city roll by. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only thing I had managed to grab from the counter before they dragged me away. It was a cocktail napkin. On one exactly like it 40 years ago, I had sketched out a design for a fuel pressure valve. Gus had kept the original. I had nothing but the memory. But Julia had made a mistake, a fatal mistake. She thought she was protecting her social status. She thought she was saving Tommy's deal. She didn't realize that by calling me demented, she had just declared war. And she didn't know that Gus Turner was not the kind of man who gave up on a puzzle just because someone told him it couldn't be solved. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the secret prepaid burner phone I kept taped underneath my nightstand, the one Julia didn't know about. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. There was a text message from an unknown number. It read, I saw your eyes, Michael. I know you're in there. Meet me at the diner on 9th Street at 5 a.m. Come alone. We have 40 years of interest to calculate. Gus. I stared at the message, and for the first time in 10 years, the fog of depression lifted. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a liability. I was the creditor, and tomorrow morning, I was going to start collecting. Before we continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. Drop a like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by the very people who were supposed to love you. Just drive around for a while, I told the driver, my voice sounding older and more tired than I actually felt. I wasn't ready to go back to that house just yet. I wasn't ready to face the music. The Uber driver, a young kid who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, just shrugged and turned up the volume on his radio. The city lights blurred past the window, streaks of neon and white against the wet pavement. I reached into my pocket and touched the cocktail napkin I had taken from the party. It was soft, flimsy paper, nothing like the heavy, grease-stained industrial paper towel I had signed back in 1984. My mind drifted back to that winter in the industrial zone. It wasn't some cinematic memory with golden lighting. It was freezing cold. The shop smelled like ozone steel coffee and pure desperation. I was 32 years old. I was a master machinist who could feel a variance of 1/1000th of an inch just by running my thumb over a piece of steel. Gus Turner was just a kid back then, maybe 25, with messy hair and eyes red from crying. He was bankrupt. His prototype, a high-pressure fuel injection valve for a new type of rocket engine, kept failing. Every time they ran the test, the seals blew out. The engineers with their fancy degrees said the tolerance was impossible to achieve with current technology. They said the metal wouldn't hold up. I remembered walking over to his workbench. He was sitting there with his head in his hands, the failed prototype resting in a puddle of oil like roadkill. I didn't say a word. I just picked up the piece. I didn't use a caliper. I didn't use a computer model. I locked the valve into my lathe and picked up a hand file. For 3 straight hours. The only sound in that shop was the rhythmic scraping of steel against steel. I worked by feel, by the vibration of the metal, shaping the curvature of the valve seat until it felt exactly right against my fingertips. I brought the tolerance down to 1/10,000th of a millimeter, a level of precision that machines couldn't even replicate back then. When I handed it back to him, he ran the pressure test. The needle climbed straight into the red zone. The valve held. I remembered the look on his face. It wasn't just relief. It was pure worship. He told me right then and there that I had saved his life. He said he would give me half the company if it ever took off. I just left. I told him I was a machinist, not a businessman. I grabbed a greasy paper napkin from his lunch. I scribbled my signature on it right next to a rough sketch of the modification I had made, and I told him to buy me a beer sometime. That was the contract. A handshake and a laugh in a freezing machine shop. I walked away and never looked back. I moved out of state when the auto industry collapsed. I lost touch and completely forgot about the valve. I thought it was just another job. I had no idea I had just handed him the master key to the aerospace industry. The Uber driver pulled up to the curb, shaking me back to the present. "We're here, buddy," he said. I looked out the window. The house sat there in the dark, a 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs that I had finished paying off 10 years ago. Every shingle, every brick, every single blade of grass had been paid for with my sweat. But the deed was in Julia's name. I had put it in her name years ago to protect our assets when I started a small contracting business that eventually went under. I trusted her. I thought we were a team. I got out of the car, my knees aching, and walked up the driveway. The front door flew open before I could even reach for my keys. Julia stood there, still in her evening gown, her face an absolute mask of fury. She didn't look worried. She didn't ask if I was hurt. She reached out, grabbed the lapel of my cheap suit, and yanked me into the hallway. "You stupid, senile old man," she screamed, slamming the door shut behind me. "Do you have any idea what you just did? Tommy was 5 minutes away from closing that deal. 5 minutes. And you had to go and cause a scene." I tried to speak to tell her that Gus had recognized me, that he wanted to talk to me, but she hurled her purse at my chest. It hit me hard, the metal buckle biting right through my shirt. "Why did Gus Turner know your name, Michael?" she demanded, pacing back and forth in the hallway like a caged tiger. "You begged him for money, is that it? You sneaked into his office and begged him for handouts like a bum. That's why he looked so shocked, because the street beggar showed up at his private party." I stared at her, stunned by the accusation. "You think I begged him?" I asked quietly. "What else could it be?" she spat. "Look at yourself. You are pathetic. You wear clothes from 3 decades ago. You smell like cheap cologne and desperation. Of course you begged him. You probably gave him some sob story about how your family mistreats you. You humiliated us, Michael. You made us look like we can't even control our own dependence." She didn't believe me. It didn't even cross her mind that a man like Gus Turner could ever see value in a man like me. To Julia, I was just an outdated accessory, a piece of furniture getting in the way of her life. "I am not a dependent, Julia," I said, my voice rising for the first time in years. "I am your husband, I paid for this house. She left a cruel, sharp sound. This is my house, and I am done taking care of you. I am done making excuses for you. She stormed into the kitchen and came back with a stack of papers. She shoved them against my chest. I've had enough, she said, her eyes cold and hard. I spoke to the lawyer this morning. He's coming over tomorrow to finalize the paperwork. You are going to sign the power of attorney, Michael. You are going to sign over your rights to the house and your pension, and then we are moving you to Silver Lake Assisted Living. I looked at the papers in my hand. They were brochures for the nursing home Tommy had mentioned. The photos showed smiling seniors playing checkers, but I knew the reality. It was a place where people went to wait for death. I'm not going, I said, letting the papers drop to the floor. I am perfectly healthy. I am not signing anything. Oh, you sign, Julia said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a sinister whisper. Because if you don't, I will have Tommy declare you mentally incompetent. We have witnesses from the party tonight, Michael. Hundreds of people saw you wandering around confused. They heard me tell Mr. Turner that you have dementia. If you fight me on this, I will have you committed to a state ward. At least at Silver Lake, you'll get a window. She snatched my cell phone right out of my pocket before I could react. And you won't be needing this, she said. You can have it back when you learn how to behave. Go to your room. She pointed to the small first-floor guest room they had moved me into 6 months ago, back when she claimed my snoring was ruining her beauty sleep. It was barely even a bedroom anymore. It was a storage closet packed with boxes of Rachel's old college textbooks and Tommy's unsold inventory from his failed business ventures. I walked toward the room, my shoulders slumped. I heard the door slam shut behind me, followed by the distinct click of the lock turning from the outside. She had locked me in. I was a prisoner in the very house I built. I sat on the edge of the narrow twin bed, listening to Julia's footsteps fade down the hallway. I felt a single tear roll down my cheek, but I wiped it away with pure rage. They thought they had won. They thought they had stripped me of everything, my dignity, my voice, my freedom. Julia thought she was dealing with a confused old man who would just roll over and accept his fate. But she had forgotten who I was. I was a master machinist. I solved problems that engineers swore were impossible. I fixed things that were broken, and this family was broken beyond all repair. I waited until the house was completely silent. I waited until I heard the loud, rhythmic snoring of Tommy from the master suite upstairs, where he was undoubtedly sleeping off his drunken stupor from the party. Then I dropped to my knees on the floor and reached underneath the mattress. My fingers brushed against the cold plastic of the burner phone I had bought with cash 3 months ago, just in case. Julia didn't know it existed. She didn't know I had a lifeline. I turned it on, the screen glowing brightly in the pitch black. There was a new message. It was from the unknown number again. The text simply read, "The legal team is ready. The trust paperwork has been drafted." I never forgot the napkin, Michael. See you at the diner. Don't be late. I checked the time. It was 3:30 in the morning. I had 90 minutes to get out of this house. I looked at the window. It was painted shut, layers of old latex sealing it tight, but I knew exactly how to break a seal without breaking the glass. I stood up, my joints popping, and I got to work. I wasn't the frail old man they thought I was. I was Michael Bennett, and I was about to collect on a 40-year-old debt that would bring their entire world crashing down. The fear was gone, replaced entirely by a cold, mechanical precision. I had a job to do. I knelt by the baseboard near the closet, my fingers finding the loose piece of molding I had pried open months ago. Behind it, wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag to keep out the moisture, was a single $20 bill and an old brick-style Nokia phone I had bought at a pawn shop. It was my emergency fund, my absolute last line of defense against total erasure. I turned the phone on, the small screen illuminating my face in the dark room. The battery was still at 80%. These old machines were built to last, just like me. The phone vibrated in my hand, a harsh buzz that sounded like a gunshot in the dead silent house. I quickly muffled it against my chest, my heart skipping a beat. I waited, listening for any break in the rhythm of Tommy's snores from upstairs or the rustle of sheets from Julia's room down the hall. The silence returned. I looked at the screen. A new text message had popped up different from the one I had received earlier. "Mr. Bennett," the message read. "I am Eleanor Sterling, Senior Counsel for Turner Corporation. Mr. Turner knows your wife is lying. He knows you are of sound mind. Please meet us at Pete's Diner on 42nd Street at 5 a.m. Do not let anyone see you leave. We will be waiting." I stared at the name, Eleanor Sterling. I didn't know her, but the precision of the message, the fact that they knew exactly where I was and what Julia had done, gave me a massive surge of adrenaline. They hadn't bought the dementia story. Gus hadn't believed it. I shoved the phone and the $20 into my pocket. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough for a cup of coffee if things went south. I checked the digital clock on the nightstand. It was 3:35. I had less than 90 minutes to get to 42nd Street. I moved to the door and pressed my ear against the wood. The house was a tomb. Tommy was still snoring like a chainsaw upstairs, a sound that vibrated right through the cheap drywall. I slowly turned the doorknob. It was engaged. A solid deadbolt that Julia had installed specifically to keep me locked inside at night. She claimed it was for my own safety, so I wouldn't wander off, but we both knew it was a cell door. I couldn't go out the front. The keys were in Julia's purse and she slept with it right on her nightstand. I turned back to the window. It was a small double-hung window that overlooked the side yard. The last time I tried to open it, the frames were glued shut with layers of cheap latex paint from the last time Tommy decided to fix up the house. I grabbed a flathead screwdriver I had hidden in my sock drawer, another tool Julia didn't know I kept. I wedged the metal tip between the sash and the frame. I worked slowly, inch by inch, applying a constant, steady pressure. The paint cracked with sharp little pops that sounded like firecrackers to my heightened senses. I paused after every single crack, waiting for footsteps that never came. Finally, the seal gave way. I pushed the sash upward. It groaned with a low protest of wood against wood, but it slid up. The night air hit me like a physical punch, cold and damp. It smelled like rain and wet asphalt. I shoved the window up as far as it would go and looked out. It was a 5-foot drop to the grass below. 10 years ago, I would have vaulted out of this without a second thought. At 72, with knees that creaked like rusted hinges, it was a dangerous maneuver, but I had absolutely no other choice. I swung one leg over the sill, then the other, sitting perched on the ledge for a moment. I looked back at the room. It was a prison cell built out of cardboard boxes and discarded furniture. I wasn't leaving a home. I was leaving a cage. I pushed off, dropping into the darkness. I hit the ground a lot harder than I expected. My left knee buckled, and I rolled into the wet grass to absorb the impact. A trick I learned working on construction sites. The pain shot up my leg, sharp and hot, but I bit my lip to keep from crying out. I lay there in the dew-soaked grass for a moment, waiting for the house lights to flick on, waiting for Julia's scream. But the house stayed pitch black and dead silent. I forced myself up, brushing the mud off my pants. I limped toward the street, sticking to the shadows of the neighbors' hedges. When I reached the sidewalk, I turned back to look at the house one last time. I had poured the foundation of that house. I had framed the walls. I had laid the roof shingles under the scorching July heat. It was supposed to be my legacy, the ultimate refuge for my golden years. Now I was sneaking away from it like a thief in the night, stealing back my own freedom. I turned my back and started walking. Pete's Diner was almost 3 miles away. I couldn't risk calling an Uber. The app was linked to the family account, and Julia would see the notification immediately. I had to walk. The city at 4 a.m. is a completely different world. It is a world of delivery trucks, garbage collectors, and people who have nowhere else to go. I kept my head down, my pace steady despite the stabbing pain in my knee. The cold wind bit right through my thin jacket, but the absolute fire in my chest kept me warm. I wasn't just walking to a diner. I was walking toward the truth. By the time the neon sign for Pete's Diner came into view, flickering with a buzzing red light, it was 4:55. My breath was coming out in ragged gasps. I stopped outside the glass door to catch my reflection. I looked like an absolute disaster. My hair was windblown, my clothes were wrinkled and stained with grass, and my face was gray from sheer exhaustion. I hesitated. Was I really going to walk in and meet a billionaire looking like this? Then I remembered the carpenter's pencil. I reached up and checked behind my right ear. It was still there. That was all the armor I needed. I pushed the door open. The diner was blasting with heat and smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee. It was almost completely empty, save for a trucker at the counter and a couple in a corner booth. I scanned the room. In the booth furthest from the windows, a man was sitting alone. He was wearing a faded army surplus jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, trying to blend in. But underneath the jacket, I could see the collar of a dress shirt that cost more than my car. And resting on the table near his hand was a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses. It was Gus. I walked over to the booth. He looked up as I approached. His eyes widened when he saw my appearance. The mud on my pants, the way I was favoring my left leg. He stood up immediately, his knees slamming against the table. "Michael," he said, his voice raspy. I was leading to the booth across from him. "I'm here, Gus," I said. "I told you I'd come." Gus sat back down slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. He reached across the table and took my hands in his. His grip was surprisingly strong for a man his age, but his hands were soft, manicured. Mine were rough, the skin thick and heavily scarred from decades of handling metal and stone. "You got old, Michael," Gus whispered, his eyes filling with tears again. "You got old, and I wasn't there to stop it." "We all get old, Gus," I said. "It beats the alternative." He shook his head, staring down at my hands. He ran a thumb over a scar on my knuckle, a permanent souvenir from a slip with an angle grinder back in '92. "But these hands," he said, his voice choking up. "I never forgot these hands. I have sat in boardrooms with the most powerful men on earth. I have shaken hands with presidents, but not a single one of them had hands like these. These are the hands that built my entire empire. And look at them. Look at what they've done to you." He wasn't looking at the dirt. He was looking at the sheer neglect. He was seeing the hard evidence of back-breaking labor that had gone completely unrewarded. He was seeing the poverty I had been living in. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his eyes, composing himself. "I'm sorry," he said, sitting up straight. "I didn't bring you here to pity you. I brought you here to pay you." He reached into a leather briefcase beside him and pulled out a thick, heavy folder. He placed it on the Formica table right between us. It landed with a solid thud, the undeniable sound of reality. "This is not charity," Michael Gus said, his voice turning back into cold steel. "This is business. This is the ledger I have been keeping for 40 years. He opened the folder. The very first page wasn't a legal document. It was a photocopy of a grease-stained paper napkin. I stared at it. The sketch was crude, drawn in blue ballpoint ink, but the lines were absolute and confident. It was the schematic for the variable pressure valve. And right in the corner, my barely legible signature. Michael. "I keep the original locked in a climate-controlled vault," Gus said. "It is the single most valuable piece of paper I own. Because of that sketch, we secured the military contract in '85. Because of that sketch, we didn't go bankrupt." He turned the page. The next document was a trust deed dated 1990. "I set this up the year we went public," Gus explained. "I couldn't find you. I hired private investigators. I ran ads. But you had completely vanished. So I did the only thing I could do. I created a ghost account. Every single time we sold an engine using your valve design, I put a percentage of the profits straight into this trust. I invested it. I let it grow. I told myself that one day you or your kids would walk through my door and I would be ready." He slid the folder toward me. Read the bottom line, Michael. I looked at the number. It was a string of digits that made absolutely no sense to my brain. It looked like a phone number. It looked like a typo. $82,450,000. I stared at him, my mouth hanging open. Gus, I said, this isn't right. It was 5 minutes of work. It was the missing piece, Gus said fiercely. Without that valve, those rockets were detonating right on the launch pad. Without you, there is no Turner engines. You're not a charity case, Michael. You are the silent co-founder of a multi-billion-dollar industry, and this money has belonged to you for 30 years. I've just been the security guard watching over it. I looked back down at the number. $82 million. Yesterday I was worried about paying for a haircut. Today I could buy the barber shop. I could buy the entire block. But as the sheer reality of the money settled in, a cold question formed in my mind. Gus, I asked, if you've been looking for me for 40 years, why did you stop? Why did you only find me tonight? Gus's face darkened. The warmth vanished from his eyes, instantly replaced by a cold, calculating fury that wasn't directed at me. He signaled to the woman sitting at the diner counter, who I now realized wasn't just a customer. She stood up and walked over. It was Eleanor Sterling, the lawyer who had texted me. She placed a single sheet of paper right on top of the folder. Why, Gus said, his voice trembling with pure rage. 5 years ago, my investigators finally tracked down an address across town. It matched your name. It matched your history. I sent a certified letter, explained everything, and requested a meeting. He pointed to the paper Eleanor had set down. And this is what I got back. I looked at the paper. It was a photocopy of a handwritten letter on floral stationery. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was sharp, angular, with loops that looked like hangman's nooses. It was Julia's handwriting. Dear Mr. Turner, the letter read, thank you for your inquiry. I am devastated to inform you that my husband, Michael Bennett, passed away from a massive stroke on May 12, 2019. He died peacefully. Regarding the gratitude payments you mentioned, please do not disturb our family during this time of mourning. However, if you wish to honor his memory, you may transfer any funds to the account listed below, which is solely under my control. I read the letter twice. The date was from 5 years ago. I was sitting in our living room watching TV when she wrote this. She had buried me. She had killed me off with a stroke of a pen just to steal what she assumed was a few $1,000s. She told you I was dead, I whispered. She sent a death certificate. Eleanor said softly. It was a forgery, but a very good one. We were about to release the funds to her account when Mr. Turner insisted on visiting the gravesite. That was when she cut all contact. She claimed it was too painful. We suspected fraud, but we couldn't prove you were alive. We thought she might have actually murdered you. Gus reached out and slammed his hand on the table. That is exactly why I froze when I saw you tonight, Michael. I thought I was looking at a ghost. But Julia, she didn't just hide you. She tried to erase you from existence just so she could cash a check. I leaned back into the booth. The throbbing pain in my knee was completely gone. The freezing chill from the walk had vanished. All I felt was a clarity so razor-sharp it could cut glass. Julia hadn't just been embarrassed by me. She hadn't just been cruel. She was a monster. She had only kept me alive because she couldn't figure out how to get the money without Gus demanding to see a body. And now she was trying to lock me away in a nursing home to finish the job. I looked at Gus. I picked up the carpenter's pencil from the table where it had fallen. I'm not dead, I said. Not yet, Gus replied, the grim smile touching his lips. And now that you've been resurrected, my friend, I think it's time we go to war. Do you want to leave with me? We can go to the airport right now. My jet is waiting. You never have to see any of them ever again. I thought about it. I thought about the sheer luxury, the peace, the perfect escape. But then I thought about Tommy laughing at me in the kitchen. I thought about Rachel staring at her phone while security dragged me away. I thought about Julia's letter. No, I said. I don't want to leave just yet. No. Gus leaned forward, instantly intrigued. What do you want to do? I want to go back, I said. I want to go back to that house. I want them to think they won. And then, when they least expect it, I want to watch their entire world burn. Gus smiled, and for the first time, he truly looked like the dangerous billionaire the magazines wrote about. I looked at Eleanor. I need you to do something for me. I need you to buy the debt. Eleanor frowned. What debt, Mr. Bennett? My son-in-law Tommy, I said. He's drowning in gambling debt. He owes 200 grand to some very bad people. That is exactly why they are so desperate to sell the house. That's why they need me out of the way. I want you to buy that debt. I want you to become his creditor today. A slow, chilling smile spread across Eleanor's face. She understood the assignment. I can have that arranged by noon, she said. Good, I said. And Gus, I need one more thing. Name it, Gus said. I need a suit, I said. Not for today, for Saturday, for the gala you're throwing. I was going back to the woman who killed me on paper. I was going to let them scream at me. I was going to let them threaten me. I was going to let them think they had won. Because when the trap finally snapped shut, I wanted to be close enough to see the exact look in Julia's eyes when she realized the husband she buried had just crawled out of his grave. You don't have to go back there, Michael. Gus said, his voice low and urgent as we stood on the sidewalk outside the diner. The city's morning traffic was just beginning to hum a low vibration of engines and tires on asphalt that I used to find comforting when I was a younger man. Now, it just sounded like a world moving way too fast for me to catch up. Gus grabbed my shoulder, his hand heavy with genuine concern. I can have a car here in 2 minutes. We can go to my estate. You can sleep in a bed with Egyptian cotton sheets. You can eat a meal cooked by a Michelin star chef. You never have to look at that woman or that house ever again. Never again. I looked at my old friend. He was offering me paradise. He was offering me an immediate exit from the absolute hell my life had become. It was tempting. God knows it was tempting to just step into a limousine and vanish into the life of luxury that had apparently been waiting for me for decades. But then I thought about the letter in my pocket. The letter where Julia had pronounced me dead. I thought about Tommy laughing at me in the kitchen, calling me a drain on their resources. If I walked away right now, they would simply assume I wandered off and died in an alley somewhere. They would get to keep the narrative. They would get to play the victims of the poor senile old man who got lost. No, Gus, I said, shaking my head slowly. I can't leave just yet. If I run away now, I am exactly the crazy old man they say I am. I need to finish this. I need to look them dead in the eyes when the walls come crashing down. I need them to know that I was the one who pulled the pin on the grenade. Gus studied my face for a long moment, searching for the hesitation he expected to find. But he found absolutely none. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. You always were a stubborn, Michael. That hasn't changed. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black card made of heavy anodized titanium. It caught the early morning light, matte and menacing. It was a Centurion card, the kind of credit card that had no limit. The kind that could buy a house or an island or a small country if you swiped it right. Take this, he said, pressing it into my rough palm. It is linked directly to the trust. There is no limit. If you get into trouble and you need to buy your way out of anything, use this. Do not hesitate. It is your money. I held the card. It felt alien, cold and hard against my calloused skin. I couldn't put it in my wallet because I didn't have one anymore. Julia had confiscated it to manage my finances. I couldn't put it in my pocket because she routinely searched my clothes for loose change. I dropped to one knee right there on the sidewalk, ignoring the loud protest of my arthritic joints, and unlaced my left work boot. It was an old boot, the leather cracked and peeling, the sole held together by sheer hope and superglue. I slid the black titanium card underneath the worn foam insole, pushing it deep into the heel. I stood back up and stomped my foot, testing the feel. It wasn't comfortable, a hard lump pressing right under my heel, but it was a good kind of pain. It was the sensation of absolute power. Every single step I took from now on, I would be walking on $82 million. Go get them, Michael, Gus said quietly. I turned around and began the long walk back to the suburbs. I had to time this perfectly. I had to be back in my room before Julia woke up at 6:30 to make her morning coffee. The walk felt entirely different this time. The bitter wind didn't bite quite as hard. The pain in my joints felt distant. I wasn't just walking anymore. I was marching. I reached the house just as the sky was turning a bruised purple in the east. The street lights were flickering off one by one. The house stood silent and imposing, a monument to my hard work that had been stolen right out from under me. I crept around to the side yard, moving through the wet grass like a ghost. The window was still open exactly as I had left it, a dark mouth gaping in the pale siding. Getting out had been difficult, but getting back in was a massive challenge. I had to drag a plastic patio chair over to the wall just to give myself a boost. I pulled myself up, my arms shaking violently from the effort, my chest scraping hard against the sill. I tumbled onto the floor of the guest room, landing in a pile of old clothes and dust bunnies. I lay there for a moment, gasping desperately, trying to calm my breathing. I listened. The house was still dead asleep. I forced myself up and quickly pushed the patio chair back to its original spot, leaning out to pull the window shut. I forced the sash down, sealing it tight again, praying that Julia wouldn't notice the broken paint seal. I hid the clothes I had worn to the diner deep at the bottom of the hamper, burying them under dirty towels. I put my pajamas back on, stripping away the dignity of the morning and slipping right back into the costume of the defeated old man. I crawled into the narrow bed and pulled the thin blanket up to my chin. My heart was racing, but my mind was as cold as ice. I waited. At exactly 7 a.m., my bedroom door exploded inward. It wasn't a knock. It was a kick. Julia stood in the doorway, already dressed in a sharp business suit, her hair perfectly styled, her face twisted into a permanent sneer of contempt. The smell of strong coffee and expensive perfume wafted in behind her, clashing violently with the musty dampness of my room. "Get up," she barked, her voice grinding like a saw on metal. "Don't tell me you're still sleeping. You are useless, absolutely useless." I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes, perfectly faking the confusion she expected to see. "Julia, what time is it?" "It's time for you to get out of my sight," she snapped. "Tommy's bringing investors here at 9 o'clock. Real investors, Michael, not the imaginary friends you think you have. They're looking at the property. We are putting the house up for sale today." She stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the space with utter disgust. She didn't notice the mud on the floor near the window. Or if she did, she just assumed I had tracked it in days ago. "You cannot be here," she continued, pacing back and forth. "You smell like old age. You look like a walking tragedy. I do not want you scaring off the buyers. You are going to the park." "The park?" I asked, my voice raspy. "But it's cold, Julia. It's going to rain." "I don't care if it hails," she hissed. "You are going to the park, and you are going to sit on a bench, and you are going to stay there until I text you to come back. Do not come back before 6 p.m. Do you understand? If I see your face before 6 o'clock, I will call the police and tell them you attacked me. I will have you committed tonight." She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a crumpled bill. She threw it at me. It fluttered through the air and landed on the floor right at my feet. It was a $5 bill. "That is for lunch," she said. "Don't spend it on booze and don't even think about calling anyone. Your phone is locked in the safe." I stared down at the $5 bill. That was exactly what she thought I was worth. That was the absolute price of my dignity to disappear for 12 hours so her son-in-law could sell the house I built with my own hands to pay off his gambling debts. I leaned down and picked up the bill. My fingers brushed the green paper. I thought about the black card hidden in my shoe. I thought about the $82 million sitting in the trust. I thought about the sheer power I held right in this exact moment to destroy her with a single sentence. But I held it back. I looked at her. For the first time in years, I didn't look at the floor. I didn't look at her chin. I looked her dead in the eyes. I let the mask slip just a fraction. I let her see the cold, hard steel right beneath the surface. "Thank you, Julia," I said, my voice steady and entirely stripped of the tremor she was used to hearing. "I'll go to the park." She paused with her hand on the doorknob. She saw something in my eyes, something that made her skin crawl. For one split second, the abuser hesitated. She looked unsure, maybe even a little scared, but then her overwhelming arrogance took the wheel again. She scoffed, completely dismissing the feeling. "Just leave," she said, turning her back on me. "And try not to drool in public." I got dressed in my worn-out corduroy pants and the exact same flannel shirt I had worn yesterday. I laced up my boots, feeling the hard, reassuring lump of the titanium card pressing under my heel. I walked out of the house, passing Tommy in the kitchen. He was frantically polishing the granite countertops, muttering to himself about interest rates and loan sharks. He didn't even bother looking up as I walked by. I stepped out the front door and walked down the driveway. I didn't look back. I walked 3 blocks to the neighborhood park. A sad little patch of green with a few rusted swing sets and a duck pond that was mostly algae. It was completely deserted this early in the morning. I sat down on a bench facing the water, pulled the $5 bill from my pocket, and smoothed it out over my knee. I stared at Abraham Lincoln's face. Then I reached into my sock and pulled out the burner phone. I dialed the number on the business card Eleanor had given me. It rang exactly once. "Sterling speaking." Her voice was crisp and wildly efficient. "Eleanor, it's Michael," I said. "Mr. Bennett, are you all right?" she asked, her tone instantly shifting to genuine concern. "I'm fine," I said, staring out at the murky water of the pond. "I'm sitting in the park because my wife just kicked me out of my own house so they can sell it. She gave me $5 for lunch." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. A silence vibrating with pure professional fury. "I am so sorry, Mr. Bennett," she said. "Just say the word. We can send a car. We can end this right now." "Not yet," I said. "We stick to the plan. But I want to accelerate the timeline." I took a deep breath. The morning air was crisp and clean. "Tommy Kramer," I said. "My son-in-law. You said you could buy up his debt." "Yes, Mr. Bennett," Eleanor replied. "We have already located the holding company that owns his markers. It's a secondary predatory lender. They will be more than happy to sell the paper for a lump sum." "Buy it," I said. "Buy every single cent of it. I want to own every mistake that man has ever made. I want to be the one holding the leash when he tries to run." "Consider it done," Eleanor said. "We will have the paperwork transferred to a shell corporation by noon. You will be his sole creditor." "And the house?" I asked. "We can place a lien on the property immediately," she said. "If he tries to sell it, the title search will flag the massive debt. He won't be able to close a single deal without paying you off first." "Good," I said. "Do it." "And Eleanor." "Yes, Mr. Bennett." "I want you to find out exactly who these investors are that are coming over today," I said. "The ones Tommy is trying to impress." "I can have that intel in an hour," she said. "Find out who they are," I said, my voice dropping to a low whisper. "And then I want you to call them. Tell them Turner Engines is highly interested in whatever it is they are buying. Tell them to back off. I want Tommy to feel the walls closing in. I want him to sweat." "Understood, Mr. Bennett," Eleanor said. "Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said. I looked down at the $5 bill on my knee and crushed it inside my fist. "I'm going to need a ride to a tailor," I said, "if I'm going to absolutely destroy them. I need to look the part." I hung up the phone and leaned back against the wooden slats of the bench. A squirrel darted across the grass, stopping to stare at me. I tossed the crumpled bill right at it. "Go buy yourself some nuts, kid," I said out loud. I was no longer the frail old man on the park bench. I was a tycoon in disguise. I was a dormant volcano, and the eruption was going to be spectacular. I waited for the black car Eleanor had promised, listening to the distant wail of sirens, knowing full well that the real emergency was happening right inside my own living room, and they didn't even know it yet. I sat on that park bench until the black town car eventually dropped me off 1 block away from the house at 540 Pheasant Street. I walked the rest of the way, my brand new custom suit completely hidden inside a garment bag that I carefully stashed in the neighbor's overgrown hedges before I ever stepped foot on my driveway. I walked through the front door at exactly 6 p.m., wearing my old corduroy pants and smelling like the outdoors. The atmosphere inside the house was thick enough to choke on. It wasn't the peaceful silence of an empty home. It was the vibrating silence of a bomb just waiting to go off. Tommy was pacing back and forth across the living room carpet, his phone pressed hard against his ear. His voice was a frantic, hushed whisper, and I caught fragments of it as I unlaced my boots. Please, I just need 48 hours. The liquidity is tied up. No, don't come here. I'll have it. I swear. He hung up the moment he saw me, his face pale and glistening with a cold sweat. He looked like a man who had just stared right over the edge of a cliff. I knew exactly why. Eleanor had done her job perfectly. The investors had walked away, and now the absolute sharks were circling. I walked right past him toward my room, fully expecting the usual barrage of insults, but Julia stepped out of the kitchen. She wasn't frowning. She was wearing an apron, and she was actually smiling. It was a tight, strained smile, a grimace that didn't reach her cold eyes, but it was there. Michael, she said, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. You're just in time. Go wash up. We are having a family dinner tonight. I paused. A family dinner? We hadn't eaten a meal together in 5 years. I usually ate my food off a tray in my tiny room or standing up over the kitchen sink. Dinner, I asked, perfectly playing the part of the confused old man. Yes, Dad. Rachel called out from the dining room. Come sit down. We made roast chicken, your absolute favorite. I went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. Right behind the gray beard and the tired eyes, I saw the man who had shaken hands with Gus Turner. I saw the man who woke up this morning with a black card hidden in his shoe. I dried my hands and walked into the dining room. The table was fully set with the good china, the plates they usually reserved for Thanksgiving or for when Tommy's wealthy friends came over to visit. In the dead center of the table sat a roast chicken, golden and gleaming with fat. It smelled heavenly, a harsh contrast to the cheap ramen and stale bread I'd been surviving on. But to me, it just smelled like bait. I sat down in my usual chair at the far end of the table. Tommy sat directly across from me, his leg bouncing nervously under the wood. Julia and Rachel sat on either side. It felt exactly like a tribunal. Rachel grabbed a bottle of wine, a cheap screw-top Merlot, and filled my glass right up to the brim. Here you go, Dad, she said. Drink up. It's good for your heart. I looked at the wine. I looked at the chicken. I looked at their faces. They were watching me the exact same way a pack of wolves watches a wounded deer. So, Tommy said, his voice cracking slightly. We had a minor setback with the house sale today. Just a paperwork thing. Nothing major. Julia shot him a lethal warning glare. Let him eat first, Tommy, she hissed. We ate in pure silence for a few minutes. I chewed the chicken slowly. It was dry and completely overcooked, but I ate it. I let them think I was grateful. I let them think I was just a hungry old dog, thrilled to finally be let inside the house. After the plates were cleared away, Rachel cleared her throat, reached under the table and pulled out a manila envelope. She placed it right next to my wine glass. Dad, she began, her voice adopting that sickly, condescending tone she only ever used when speaking to toddlers or service staff. Mom, Tommy and I have been talking. We are worried about you. You are getting older. Your memory just isn't what it used to be. Managing your own affairs is just way too much stress for you, isn't it? I looked at her, my own daughter. I remembered teaching her how to ride a bike. I remembered paying for her braces. I remembered the day she graduated college. And now, she was looking at me like I was a broken appliance she needed to return to the store. It is difficult, I muttered, staring down at my wine. Exactly. Rachel sat instantly pouncing on my admission. It is way too difficult. We want you to relax, Dad. We want you to enjoy your golden years without worrying about bills or taxes or legal nonsense. We want to take care of everything for you. She slid a document out of the envelope. It was thick, stapled neatly in the top corner. We had the lawyer draft this up, she said, pushing a pen across the table toward me. It's just a standard form. It gives Mom and Tommy the ability to handle all the boring stuff. The sale of the house, your pension, the bank accounts. You just sign this and we will do all the rest. You will be safe. You will be taken care of. I put on my reading glasses, the cheap ones with the arm held together by duct tape. I pulled the document closer. I read the title printed in bold black letters. Durable power of attorney. Unconditional. Irrevocable. I scanned the clauses. It gave them the absolute right to sell my assets. It gave them the right to make all medical decisions for me. It gave them the legal right to commit me to a facility entirely against my will. It was a total surrender. It was a death sentence signed in ink. I realized right then exactly why they were doing this. The title search. When I bought this house 30 years ago, I put Julia on the deed, yes. But I also included a strict clause that required mutual consent for any sale. I had completely forgotten about it. They must have found out today. They couldn't sell the house to pay off the loan sharks without my signature. They didn't want to take care of me. They needed to harvest me. I picked up the pen. It was a cheap plastic ballpoint. I hovered it right over the signature line. My hand was as steady as a rock. The tremor they always mocked me for, the one caused by decades of gripping, vibrating power tools, was completely gone. Adrenaline is a wildly powerful stabilizer. I looked up. I looked directly into Rachel's eyes. Rachel, I said softly. Yes, Dad, she asked, leaning in closer, her eyes practically starving. Just sign right there. Do you really want me to sign this? I asked. My voice was no longer confused. It was crystal clear. Do you know what this actually says? It says they can sell the house. It says they can lock me away in a nursing home. If I sign this and they sell the house to pay off Tommy's debts, you know I won't have anywhere to go. You know I will end up on the street. Is that what you want? The room went dead silent. Rachel blinked, genuinely caught off guard by the bluntness of the question. She looked at Tommy, then over at Julia, desperately searching for a script. Dad, don't be so dramatic, she said, her laugh nervous and brittle. Nobody is going out on the street. We are family. We are doing this for you. Just sign the paper. She avoided my eyes. She stared at the pen instead. She couldn't look at me because she knew. She knew exactly what would happen to me, and she simply didn't care. As long as her lifestyle was preserved, my actual survival was entirely optional. I looked at Julia. She was sipping her wine, watching me with cold, detached indifference. She had already spent the money in her head. I looked at Tommy. He was practically vibrating with anxiety, his eyes darting frantically between the pen and his watch. I looked back down at the paper. I pressed the tip of the pen right onto the signature line. Then with one slow, deliberate motion, I drew a massive, dark X across the entire page. I pressed down hard, ripping right through the paper. No, I said. Tommy stood up so violently that his chair flew backwards and slammed into the wall. What did you just say? He roared. His face turned a blotchy, rage-filled purple. I said no. I repeated, tossing the pen onto the table. It clattered loudly against the china. I am not signing it. I am not giving you my house. You senile old bat, Tommy screamed. He lunged forward and swept his arm violently across the table. The roast chicken, the wine bottle, the glasses, everything went flying. The platter shattered against the wall. Red wine splashed across my shirt like blood. Do you have any idea what you are doing? Tommy yelled, spit flying from his mouth. He marched around the table and grabbed me right by the lapels of my coat. He hauled me up out of my chair, bringing his face mere inches from mine. I could smell the stale whiskey on his breath. You are going to sign that paper, old man, he growled. You are going to sign it right now, or I will beat you until your hand doesn't work anymore. I need that money, Rachel screamed. Tommy, stop. But Julia just sat there watching coldly. Tommy shook me. He was 42 years old, soft from a life of desk work and heavy executive lunches. I was 72, but for 40 straight years. I had wrestled with steel I-beams and torqued the massive bolts that held skyscrapers together. My hands were forged by pure labor. My grip strength was something men half my age couldn't even dream of matching. I reached up and grabbed Tommy's wrist. My fingers wrapped tightly around his soft flesh and found the joint. I didn't just squeeze. I clamped down. Tommy's eyes went wide. He tried to yank his arm away, but he couldn't. I was a human anchor. I twisted my wrist, slowly applying the torque. It was a very simple mechanical principle. Leverage. Tommy let out a high-pitched howl and dropped straight to his knees, forced downward by the agonizing pressure on his joint. His face contorted in pure pain. "Let go of me," he screamed. "You're going to break it." I leaned down, bringing my face right next to his ear. The room was dead quiet, save for his pathetic whimpering. "Your debt," I whispered, my voice low and ice cold, "is not my fault. You gambled. You lost. Do not ever lay your hands on me again." I squeezed harder for just a fraction of a second, just enough to let him feel the bones start to grind. Then I let him go. Tommy scrambled backward across the floor, cradling his wrist, literal tears streaming down his face. He looked at me with absolute, unfiltered terror. He had forgotten that before, I was a burden. I was a man who built things with his bare hands. I straightened my jacket casually, brushing off a straight piece of chicken skin. I looked at Julia and Rachel. They were staring at me like I had just shape-shifted into a wolf. "I'm going to my room," I said. "Do not disturb me." I walked out of the dining room, stepping right over the shattered china and the spilled red wine. I didn't look back. I went into my tiny room and locked the door. I sat on the bed, my heart rate perfectly steady. They thought they were desperate before, but now they were drowning. And tomorrow, I was going to turn on the fire hose. The next morning, the air in the house was so thick with tension, you could carve it with a knife. Tommy was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing his swollen wrist with a bag of frozen peas, his face pale and clammy. He refused to even look at me. Every single time I moved, he flinched. He had learned the hard way that the old man still had plenty of torque left in his grip. Julia was pacing relentlessly up and down the hallway. Her heels stepped out a frantic, nervous rhythm on the hardwood floor. She was terrified, but not of me. She was terrified of the phone ringing. She was deathly afraid that the loan sharks Tommy had borrowed from were coming to collect their collateral, which was the very roof over our heads. I sat quietly in the corner, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug, just watching them completely fall apart. It was a fascinating case study in pure desperation. They were like rats on a sinking ship, snapping at each other while the water level rose. But I knew something they didn't. I knew the water wasn't just rising. I was the one controlling the tide. Eleanor had purchased Tommy's debt at 9 a.m. sharp. Technically speaking, I owned him. I could have walked over there and told him to get the hell out of my house right then and there. But I didn't. I wanted to see the entire performance play out. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the sharp, impatient buzzing of a debt collector. It was a single, solid chime. Tommy jumped so hard he dropped his frozen peas. Julia froze in her tracks. Her eyes widened with absolute panic. She motioned for me to stay put and crept toward the front door, peeking through the peephole. She let out a massive sigh of relief, unlocked the deadbolt, and smoothed down her skirt. "It's a courier," she whispered. "A fancy one." She opened the door. Standing on the porch was a man in a perfectly tailored slate gray uniform. He wasn't your average delivery driver tossing boxes out of a van. He stood at strict attention, holding a sleek black box wrapped in a silk ribbon. He looked like he was guarding the gold reserves at the central bank. "Delivery for Mr. Michael Bennett," he said, his voice deep and highly professional. Julia stepped forward, her hand extended. "I will take it. I am his wife." The courier didn't move an inch. He pulled the box back slightly, just a few inches out of her reach. I apologize, ma'am. Strict instructions. Hand delivery only to Mr. Michael Bennett. Signature required. Identity verification required. Julia bristled, her face flushed a hot pink. That is ridiculous. He is right here, but he is indisposed. Just hand it to me. The courier looked right past her, scanning the room until his eyes landed directly on me. Mr. Bennett? He asked. I stood up and walked toward the door. Tommy scrambled out of my way, his chair scraping loudly against the floorboards. I walked right past Julia, who looked like she wanted to tackle me to the ground, but didn't dare make a scene in front of this stranger. I am Michael Bennett, I said. The courier nodded respectfully. He handed me a digital tablet. If you could just sign right here, sir. I signed my name, the exact same signature that was on the napkin sitting inside Gus's vault. The exact same signature that was on the deed to this house. The courier handed me the black box. It was heavy. Way heavier than cardboard had any right to be. Have a wonderful day, sir, he said, touching the brim of his cap. Then he turned around and walked back to a sleek, unmarked black sedan idling at the curb. I closed the door. Julia was on me in an instant. What is that? She demanded, her eyes completely glued to the box. Give it to me. I walked over to the kitchen table and set the box down. It was made of thick, matte-textured paper with a Turner Aerospace logo embossed in pure silver right on the lid. I pulled the silk ribbon. The lid lifted with a soft sigh of vacuum pressure. Nestled inside, resting on a bed of black velvet, was a single envelope made of heavy, cream-colored cardstock. I opened the envelope. Inside was a rigid acrylic slab, bordered in authentic gold leaf. The text was laser engraved right into the surface. The board.